Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast on election eve. And I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Berkeley, California, bastion of snowflake. And as always, I'm joined by Bob Bazanko in Houston, Texas. And I think election day is going to be even scarier than Halloween. Yeah, it's definitely going to be scarier than Halloween. A couple of years ago, Bob, I had my Trump mask. And when he lost the election, I ditched it. And I'm bummed that I ditched it because I think it would be a really good prop for today of all days. So, folks, we're going to be talking about the election. And we're going to be talking about some of our thoughts and hopefully have a little bit different perspective than you're seeing in the mass media. But we're hoping to have a little bit of a good show for it. Yeah, we're looking forward to this. We've talked about these issues a lot, but since everybody's talking about the election, everybody in media is, so we got to do this too. So we're going to decide what we're going to get. Are we going to get Civil War II or World War III? Because we're both. Why not both? It's a floor waxing and a dessert topping for the old people out there. I should get that reference, but yeah, you might. But we're looking at really an abysmal situation, and we're going to try to talk a little bit about it. I don't know. Whistle past the graveyard. And where to begin? The polls right now are at a dead heat. They're showing nothing. It's, as we always say, it's stunning that like nearly half of America can still support Trump. In a sane world, he would be at like 3%. But here we are. So why is it? Why is this? We know America's a right-wing country, but did you ever see this? It's pretty unbelievable. And there's a school out there that thinks that MAGA is just this aberration. But I'm at the point where it's not. And I'm from Texas. I live in California now, but I'm from Texas and I'm on social media, lots of people I grew up with. And it's the right-wing Trumpism. And I'm not even talking about Republicans. I'm not talking about Bush Republicans or Reagan Republicans or anything like this, but this sort of nativist, fake economic populism, crazy, lock up the enemy within, which I find terrifying as I'm one of those people that he would be targeting, as we both are. The fact that 45 to 48% of the country of people I grew up with and I've known my whole life support this maniac is very disturbing. On the flip side, the people who are in the liberal spectrum who are, or even identify as progressive, who are basically making this argument that there's lesser evil genocide is also very disturbing. It's very scary. And people arguing that and saying the only way to stem off fascism and a worse genocide is to vote and then have no other plan is also very concerning to me as well. Yeah, I think to start, one thing that's caught my attention is that various often self-appointed leaders of the left and the media have been taking very different approaches to this. So one day, one of these big shots from Brooklyn, let's say, Brooklyn, Iowa, right? Yeah, exactly. So one day, one of them will say, "Oh, Trump's not that dangerous. Yeah, he's bad, but you're exaggerating it." And then the other side will say, "Trump is the worst thing ever. You got to vote for Harris," and all that kind of stuff. To be clear, I don't want Trump to win. I'm not agnostic on that. I could never make an affirmative argument for Kamala Harris. I just can't for lots of reasons, even more than Gaza. Gaza's the big one. Genocide's a deal killer, especially when you're killing children and burning people alive in tents and targeting hospitals and journalists and assassinating healthcare workers and who knows what else, and invading two other countries or attacking two other countries as well. But so when it comes to the Middle East, I don't see what Trump could do that already isn't being done by Biden, Harris, Blinken, and all these people. I guess he could just authorize nukes on January 21st next year, but it's hard to imagine it be much worse. And on some issues, clearly there's a gap, but we also have, as we've talked about many times on the show, including a great show with Noam Chomsky about pretty much 2 years ago today, wasn't it? I think it was around this time. It was around I think it was the 50th anniversary of the McGovern campaign. Yeah, it was 2 years ago. And we've talked about this a lot, like why the Democrats are so hapless and so bad, and why especially the GOP has been able to assume this reputation as the friend of poor people and working people. And like you said, this phony populism. And that part's, I think, really at the crux of everything we're talking about here. It really did upend American politics. And last thing I'll say before you mentioned how people see Trump as like unique in American history, da, da, da. You and I have talked about, I think even on one of our episodes, we showed an ad for Barry Goldwater in 1964, which was as hysterical and alarming and had all the code words and the symbols and the images that Trump would use today. People doing drugs, homosexuals, and you have drinking and you have the youth out of control. And then if you ever looked, and we talk a lot, and partly ingest that Nixon and Reagan would be liberals today. Nixon, with some of his policies actually, but Nixon and Reagan ran these kinds of campaigns as well. They were ugly, nativist, racial campaigns, right? Lee Atwater.
Daddy Bush ran one in 1988 as well.
Yeah. It's different though. He's a different kind of cat, right? And I'm not a shrink, but I think there's some like really deep sociopathic mental illness there. Biden was out. He's old, but maybe he has a Parkinson's, who knows what, but like his condition, I think is like natural part of the process. Trump is like fucking insane. And I do take him seriously. He's not going to be able to do a lot, but when you have people like Mitch McConnell in there greasing the skids for you, then a lot more is possible.
Yeah, and the other thing, speaking of the cat, Trump being a different sort of cat, there's disturbing revelations which have resurfaced, because I feel like I've heard these a couple of years ago, but the media and the Harris campaign has been making a big deal about Trump, talking about how he had told Kelly at one point. Kelly was his chief. John Kelly was his Secretary of Homeland Security, who then became his chief of staff and was his longest serving chief of staff. One of the things that he told John Kelly was that I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. And actually lose the war and actually plot against him as well. I mean, let's just remember what was it, Operation Valkyrie, where they tried to take him out. And I believe he had said that he said something along the lines of that Hitler did do some good things, right?
There were 5 people on both sides.
So five people on both sides of World War II. Yeah. And it's unprecedented. That's when he was in the Oval Office.
Then he also, that was during the D-Day trip where didn't he say that these people were losers? Why did they, enlist? He couldn't imagine enlisting and fighting for somebody else.
Yeah, can you imagine the president touring the graveyard at Normandy and saying, these guys were just losers and suckers. And it's just no filter is one thing that's going on there.
Yeah.
But Trump talking about how praising Hitler, let's just think about that for a minute. Praising Hitler. And I actually don't know if there's a more villainous icon of the 20th century than Adolf Hitler. And yet, Trump thinks it's a good idea to talk about some of the good things that Nazi Germany did.
And it doesn't seem to hurt him. I'm looking forward. We're going to be talking to a couple of people who study media in the near future, because just what I call sane washing of all this, they report it. It's just the news story. It's the news cycle, right? It's really quite remarkable that the stuff this guy says. You would think 2016, he attacked Gold Star parents. He does everything. Like he just, and I think the media sane washes it, and the Democratic Party is like they're out of it. There's nothing they can do. They're useless. They're hopeless.
The other story that Kelly's told, which is one I hadn't heard before, which is where a Mexican-American woman who was enlisted was actually raped and murdered, I think, at a base in Texas. And when they buried her, Trump, it was a $60,000 funeral with Trump. $60,000 is way too much to bury a Mexican.
Didn't hear that one either.
Yeah, that's one that came up recently when they resurfaced the sort of Hitler story.
Yeah.
But this is a person the people who are supposed to be protecting the country, whatever, I'm as anti-militarist as it gets, but people who are supposed to be protecting the country, the people they enlist to like stand on the wall. And then we have the president who is, denigrates them every chance he gets.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. Look at Lee's attacking now, the comedian with the Puerto Rico joke. He's hopefully pissed off on the Oracle enough to make a difference, right? Yeah, these guys, like you said, there's no filter, and apparently people are telling them to reel it in, but what would his incentive be? The one thing that strikes me too is I do want to do a little history lesson on this too, because I think it's helpful. But one thing that really strikes me is how the Democrats are silent. I'm watching these ads here in Texas, and they're mostly for Cruz and a few Trump ads. And let me preface this by saying I'm not a fan of Biden or Harris, and I don't think their economic programs were what we need. But let's leave it at that. But these ads are just like these apocalyptic, hysterical ads about how bad the economy is.
how bad Biden and Trump. If you believe in this economy, right? The stock market's at 42,000. Unemployment's lower than it's been in a long time. Prices are back down now, and presidents don't have a lot to do with inflation unless you institute like tariffs and stuff like that. And yet the Democratic Party has no response to that. They just make shit up. Kamala Harris wants to take murderers out of jail and give them sex change operations, put them on the street, that kind of just insane stuff. That if you had any sense, you wouldn't even need to Google it. That's BS and it's contrived. And there's no response to it. There's just no response.
More sex change operations happened in prison when Trump was president than any other time. That's true. That's true.
Oh, I absolutely believe it. And who cares? What are we talking about? The numbers on these things. And for the GOP, and I noticed this in Texas first, but then I've been reading, and this is their national strategy. They're going really all in and hard on these anti-transgender ads, right? And they have these really ugly ads here where they show like a guy with a mustache beating up girls and stuff like that. And again, I mean, if you were going to make a list of the 1,000 problems America faces today, that wouldn't be on it, right? We're dealing with the real crisis there, obviously, is these attacks against LGBTQ kids, right? They're the ones at risk. They're 4 times more likely to be the victims of violence in states that have anti-trans laws. Their suicide rate is higher. They're getting beaten up. They're the ones at risk, not freaking, when did Trump say you send your kid to school, he's going to come home with a sex change operation? Who knows that easy? You go down to the gym, boom, local anesthetic, boom, you're done. You go home, you went to school as Dominic and you come home as Donna. Or when he said, what was it? They're doing abortions after the baby's born, right? Yeah. Who can believe this shit?
Yeah. And it's all this culture war stuff, which is what the Republicans think is like their winning strategies. They're going to scare suburbanites. They're going to scare rural people with all of these scary stories from the big cities and from the liberal bastions or what have you. It's vile.
Yeah. And the crime rate is higher in rural areas than in New York and Chicago.
Right, exactly. It was fair.
Yeah. But one thing I want to do, though, just briefly, because I think how we got here is important, because we look at these things in the vacuum of 2024 or maybe 3 Trump elections or something like that. But in 1972, the Democrats were just routed. McGovern just was destroyed, right? He won D.C. and Massachusetts, I believe, were the only 2 states he won. And in the aftermath of that, a group of Democratic insiders, including Scoop Jackson and Governor Jimmy Carter, essentially moved to take over the Democratic Party and move it in a new direction, which they did. And this is when, and we talked to this with Chomsky about this at length. The Democratic Party embraces the Trilateral Commission and a more interventionist foreign policy, and especially with Carter, neoliberalism, a shift away. So the repudiation of the Great Society, of the New Deal actually began with Carter, with Reagan. And then by 1980, the shift was very rapid, right? What always is striking is like in 1974, the Watergate class, right? The Democrats had, I believe, veto-proof majorities in both houses in the election of 1974, right? Like 67 senators, whatever, representatives, right? Only 6 years later, Reagan just destroys Carter and the Republicans take over the Senate, right? And the lesson learned from the Democratic Party there was to consistently tack right, be more like the Republicans, no matter what the reality is on issues, whether they be gun violence or abortion or healthcare or drug legalization later on. The Democratic Party would basically reject the data, which shows significant numbers of Americans supporting things like gun violence regulations or abortion rights. Of course, they would ignore that and simply move further. And this is how you get like the Hyde Amendment. And this is how people like Biden cut their teeth. He was part of this in the 80s.
Right.
Were you going to say?
It also should be noted that the Watergate leagues who came in 74 were the first class of those that were moving to the right. Like, it's often touted as, the Democrats swept in 1974. But it's where we see actually more centrist Democrats come in, and then they begin purging the old New Dealers that were actually in the House and Senate off their committees and making sure they get primaried out and things like that. People who had like during the New Deal era through the 50s and 60s had actually fought the banking sector, for example. And so that's actually an important thing to note too, is that purge happens as quickly as 1974.
Yeah, it's the stars of that era, I think, were like Jimmy Carter, Gary Hart, Michael Dukakis. How was that? That's what they could come to. Yeah, that's the nomination. Mondale, in many ways, was the last of that old guard. Exactly. He got destroyed and ran a horrible campaign. And essentially, he was like
They gave him a nomination because, like Hillary in 2016, it was his turn. Or Dole in 1996, or McKay or whoever, it's their turn. And we're living with that. And so with Reagan, you have this real rapid shift where a bunch of Democrats actually switched parties nationally. Phil Graham did in the Senate. I believe he started as a Democrat, people like that, right?
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party essentially surrendered, and that's when you get things like in the mid-'80s, the creation of the DLC, Democratic Leadership Conference, and the main, I think, figures in that were Bill Clinton and Al Gore, who wanted to end. We're going to end welfare as we know it. They give you the crime bill, and it's in full bloom by this point, this rightward shift. And even with that, Americans hadn't changed that much. And the Democratic Party, like I said, ignored its data, ignored its constituents, and we're seeing that today. So it's not the kind of thing that's easy to fix because it's been going on for a half century.
Now it's in their DNA.
It's in their DNA, right? The fact that, and the media won't say this, let's be clear, if Harris loses, it will be because of Gaza. It will. There's no doubt that will be the issue. And the Democratic Party is, what gets me is they don't even engage it. They just ignore everything. They remind me of those old movies set in the 1950s, the family dramas where, dad and the kid are fighting and mom is saying, quiet, who wants more peas? Like, you just ignore this dysfunction. And that's the Democratic Party. They just ignore the dysfunction. They won't say anything about it. They won't engage it. When they do talk about Gaza, it's basically to be really scolding and condescending. Learn your history. I'm speaking. Be quiet.
Right.
Kick people out. Shout people down. And the fact that Kamala Harris can't even engage with that, acknowledge it, is really terrifying.
And just to put it out there is that there's also been a rise of progressives within the Democratic Party trying to retake the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party and to take that back with Paul Wellstone and Howard Dean. But they very popular in 2016 and 2020. Bernie Sanders also terrible on Gaza. But he's seen as the progressive hero. He's the most popular politician. He's the most popular politician in the party, I believe. AOC,
I believe.
in America, yeah. And AOC also this progressive champion, also like terrible on Gaza and many other things as well. And so it's not just the centrist wing or the right wing of the Democratic Party. Is the progressives are completely corrupted by this as well.
AOC said, Harris is working tirelessly for peace. Come on, you embarrass yourself when you say shit like that.
Yeah.
And Sanders is going around bragging how the Cheneys are supporting us now. Like, can you imagine in 2004, 2008, 2006, whatever, somebody's saying, oh, we need to get the Cheneys on our side. See, I've heard it attributed to both Schumer and Rendell, who was governor of Pennsylvania. They went all in on this idea that we'll lose working class white guys' votes in places like Ohio. But look at all these suburban Republicans who are going to switch sides to us. They made that clear. And to some degree, Harris's lead among women is quite significant. At the same time, like 45% of women are supporting Trump, right? So it calls into the question, clearly abortion is a big issue, but for a lot of people, I think for a lot of women, I don't think it's a deal breaker.
I think it's a lot of people, but I don't know, this culture war stuff. And the other thing crazy to me is how evangelicals and Christian conservatives continue to support Trump as well.
He's just a rapist, corrupt fellow. That's all, right? Jesus would for
adulterer.
And he's trying to put his opponents in jail.
They probably like that. So,
yeah. I think you have to take this guy seriously. Is he going to round people up and throw them in death camps like millions of people? Probably not. I don't think so. But, just the things that he's capable of doing that we saw, like the Muslim ban or, the border wall, which is just a scam, which is separating families. Yeah, and the other thing that really surprised me is there is a really vibrant economic argument to be made here against Trump. And you're not hearing it. I'm seeing this now. I'm seeing articles warning people about what Trump will do, not just in Lefty, not just from Monthly Review, but in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and WAPO. They're all writing these articles. First of all, migration, if this guy deport even a decent fraction of migrants who aren't here with the official paperwork, do you know what that's going to do to just agriculture? Hey, I don't construct him. Because I don't want to sound like I'm encouraging this, but the point is, and the Democrats have never engaged this, immigration is a labor issue, and they never spoken it. They've always turned it into this moral issue, right? They're rapists, they're murderers, their families, they're being separated. Look at the children, right? It's a labor issue. Who do you think is who's cleaning up North Carolina and Florida right now? after those stores, right?
Right.
The other day, I was walking in my neighborhood, and there's one of the few houses in my neighborhood that has a Trump sign. And there was a group of people doing yard work in the front. None of them spoke English. So this person with the Trump sign certainly didn't hesitate to hire these folks. Purdue and Tyson poultry companies and huge farms all over the country. What's going to happen if Trump really does crack down, right? Which is certainly, he's going to do something, right? We're going to see that. We're going to see that. And I'm not suggesting these people should work so we can get cheaper vegetables. I don't mean that at all.
This is doing away with child labor law so they can have 12-year-olds go do it. But
yeah,
often a lot of those kids are undocumented as well.
Yeah. Look at during COVID, who do you think was getting sick and dying in significant numbers? These people working in these, houses, what do you call them? Slaughterhouses in Nebraska, and in farms in Arizona, right? Significant COVID rates. So it's just that it's turned into this moral alarm, this hysteria. Among Republican voters, it's considered the most important issue. And I'll see it in Ohio. Immigration is not really a thing in Ohio. You have some agricultural workers in the northwest part of the state near Toledo. Other than that, you have Haitians in Springfield, right? Things like that. So it's not like they managed to convince everybody. It's classic case. And I think, and this is why people get pissed at me and liberals really get angry at me. So much of this is on the Democratic Party for surrendering 50 years ago, never putting up a fight, appointing weak-willed people, botching political appointments like Supreme Court justices or Merrick Garland, he's a sleeper GOP agent. Not convinced.
I will also say getting themselves in bed with the millionaire and billionaire class as well, which is, I have a thing about next to talk about. But I think that is the gist of this whole thing, is that the Democrats have had this rightward move for the last 50 years. And that's why we're at this point where it's a right-wing Democratic Party and a far-right, crazy Republican Party. Like the Republican elites are being purged from the party by Trump. And the ones who are still there basically just kowtow to him on all matters.
As Jeff Bezos does now too, right?
Yeah, as billionaires do as well. I'm going to go into the billionaire thing for a minute here, which is,
let me just say one thing, because I think connects to what the economic stuff we were talking about. The other thing that I'm seeing from like the Wall Street Journal and others is they're really concerned about tariffs, which are going to create significant inflation. And also, and I think this speaks to what you do, tax cuts. Because at the end of the day, and remember Henry Paulson said this in 2016, he said, we were along with Trump for the tax cuts. We wanted that, but we were stuck with the rest. And they still feel that way, obviously. They want tax cuts.
Yeah, I think that's important. I also think that we've seen an exponential increase in the number of billionaires in the world in the last couple of decades. And they've been playing a pretty big role in this election in particular. Actually, Trump a lot. The big picture is the 150 billionaire families have spent almost $2 billion in support of presidential congressional candidates this cycle for both parties. And 700 million more than was spent in 2020. And we're looking at people like, on the Trump side, we're looking at Elon Musk and Timothy Mellon and Marianne Adelson. I think we've talked about this before, but I just want to point out that there's this class of billionaires which basically support Trump because he wants to deregulate everything. Is that they see this as their opportunity to go back to the 1920s. Or prior to the 1920s, they will return to the Gilded Age, and then there will be, it's not like they're not already masters of the universe, but this will completely cement that for a long period of time. What are you going to say?
No, he's not proposing to eliminate all income taxes, right? Which none of us are fans of income taxes, but that's how society is wanting. Which is no tax on tips, no tax on veterans, just no taxes on this and that. At some point, like that's Bannon fantasy, right? The destruction of the administrative state, which, and this is just an old horse and I'll just whip it once, but that's actually not fascism at all. Fascism actually builds up these state institutions and combines them with these corporate entities to create like a functioning society, an administrative state. Actually, if you believe in that, now Trump is a lot of fucking ugly things. He's a terrible bad guy. It's his own military people that have attacked him, right? But I think it's worth noting, by eliminating the administrative state, that's hardcore libertarianism.
Right. And that's what Project 2025 is to basically uproot the civil service and do away with that. And then also there's an element of, busting unions, which is also something that the billionaire class wants, and there's this sort of union revival, labor revival going on right now or at least it appears to be that. And Trump is talking about targeting Sean Fain, who's the head of the United Auto Workers, as like one of his number one priorities as well.
Yeah. You mentioned the billionaire supporting Trump. To be fair, I think Harris actually has way more support and is getting way more money from Wall Street and hedge funds and groups like that. I think Trump's really is like people like Musk and Thiel, that kind of new techie guys, but also a lot of the local Commonwealth and oligarchs, right? The Uline family and kind of coal and oil, these dirty industries, these extractive industries, things like that. But Harris is very popular.
Harris is very popular with the Wall Street people and hedge fund people, and probably what we would say is more the millionaire class. The billionaire class has given $568 million to Trump and only $127 million to Harris.
Really?
So the super wealthy,
Bloomberg and Gates gave her $50 million each, haven't they, or something?
And Melinda Gates has, and Lorraine Powell Jobs has as well. But Harris's money is coming in is from more like the millionaire class, whereas those sort of crazy right-wing billionaires are all on Trump.
Yeah. But on the other side, you have Harris, who is the only person who has actually defended Nadia Khan at the FTC during this campaign has been
Lena Khan,
I'm sorry, has been J.D. Vance. He's defended her, whereas Harris, the rich guys got to Harris and said, we want her gone, and Harris won't commit to anything. Whereas Vance, it is amazing that for 50 years, the Republican Party has just helped eviscerate unions. It's attacked working class. It's entered into these massive tax cuts for people at the very top. Standards of living for working people who are more productive than ever have gone down. And yet they are able to plausibly present themselves as the party of working people. When it gets back to, we've been doing a lot of entities, which heads up, make sure you listen going forward. We're going to do all kinds of neat stuff on the 25th anniversary of the WTO battles, right? But in that period, we saw this mass dislocation, right? And that was by Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party. And NAFTA really mucked up American politics, really has mucked it up. And given the Republican Party this entree to say, look at what they did to you. And they're right.
I think that's an important thing to point out is in one of these interviews that we have coming up next in about a month, at the end of November, around the 25th anniversary, is we actually talk quite a bit about NAFTA and what it's done to derail American politics, and it shifted everything around.
It started out, I think, for us as a lefty issue, this is how we got to know each other. And it was the left who was speaking out against the WTO, against NAFTA, against these transnational, supranational organizations. We explained what they did. And yet when it came time to act, it was Brexit in Europe or Trump here in the US who got the fruits from it, right? Not us, because the Democratic Party was all in and embraced it, right? And ignored, like Labor, one of its main constituents. And which is why now in places like Ohio, that used to be like overwhelmingly Democratic, 2/3 or so, these districts are now all Republican, and they're Trump Republicans. And much of it is because of NAFTA, when people in Youngstown hate the Clintons and think NAFTA, and they're not wrong,
No, not at all. Definitely encourage people to listen to those interviews. There's actually some important points around organizing that we make in there as well, which we'll close out with today. But do you want to talk about Cuba for a minute?
Yeah, just because yesterday there was another vote on ending the embargo. The vote was 187 in favor of ending it, 4 abstentions, and 2 against ending the embargo. Can you guess what those 2 countries are? I bet you'll never guess what those 2 countries were.
Could it be the U.S. and Israel?
Oh, that was just a lucky guess. Who would have ever thought those 2? Yeah, once again, and I just want to point out, because people say Gaza is the only thing. No, it's not. Because what the U.S. is doing, supporting in Gaza, they've been doing in Cuba for over 60 years now. And Cuba right now is really in a bad way. It's in pretty bad shape. They're having power outages. There are food shortages. And the U.S. is using this to obviously foment anger against the government there. They're sponsoring, who knows what they're doing with these people in Miami. When Obama, the best thing Obama ever did, hands down, I think, was this opening toward Cuba. And when I went there in 2017, I left the U.S. the day after Trump announced that he was getting rid of these Obama era opening to Cuba, right? And Biden has doubled down on that and actually gone even further. It's not just, I mean, the children in Cuba now, which has always had like a gold standard medical system, right? We talked to a guy a few weeks ago who mentioned that, right? Cuba's always had a gold standard medical system, and now you have children who aren't getting adequate nutrition, or don't have access to milk, who are getting sick, and it's really, and this is a product of the Democratic Party. Let's keep that in mind. And this is where Biden is rejecting the Obama era policies for Cuba. And also keep in mind that Biden essentially put the brakes on Israel from attacking oil facilities in Iran. Can't attack oil facilities. Burning people alive in a tent, killing kids in Gaza, it's cost the war.
Taking out a neighborhood to take out a member of Hezbollah. No problem.
Years ago, Roger Hilsman, I believe it was, who was an aide to JFK, was talking about, I think it was Laos, not Vietnam, but it doesn't matter. And they were talking about what the U.S. should do real early. And he said something to the effect of, revolutions are bloody, people get hurt. And this is the Biden approach. Things are bloody in the Middle East. People are going to get hurt. And kids are going to die in Cuba. People get hurt. They're very casual. And being casual about this is just inexplicable to me.
It all should be noted that this is part of the plan, part of the program, not just in Cuba, but also Venezuela and other parts of the world and Trump's not actually doesn't deviate too much from them. I guess he does on Ukraine. This is like the program for U.S. foreign policy for a century or more, century and a half.
Except for JFK, because he was going to create global peace.
Yeah, he was the only dumb. That's why they killed him. I don't know if you know that. That's why they killed him.
Speaking of that, I just ask you a question, because a lot of these conspiracy theories are about like how the deep state hates Trump and they can't stand him and they're going to defeat him and they beat him in 2020. The deep state really does hate Trump. Why is he still alive?
The other question I actually think, which is for the other side, is if Trump is truly a fascist, then why is our only solution to deal with him?
Well,
life depends on it.
Right. Well, for my whole life, I've heard this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and this is the red line, and things about. And this is an important election. I'm not saying we should personally have trouble even thinking about voting for Harris. Although if she really does promise to put Elon Musk in jail for life, then I'm pulling the lever for that one. But this is what they've been saying since 2015 with Trump. Right? He's a fascist. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Well, let's vote in 4 years, right? That's all we have, our vote, right? Yeah. The Republicans are going to steal the vote, and look at what they're doing. So you don't do anything to stop them ahead of time. Right now, there should be publicly announced plans for major uprisings if Trump monkey writes the election. And remember, in 2020, they were going to do that, and the Democrats called it off. And they gave Trump all this airtime, like 10 weeks of unfiltered and uninterrupted airtime, just to spout all this bullshit instead of slapping it down, right? Democratic Party, so the courts have rejected. The courts might not reject it this time. There's a good chance, given what the Supreme Court's doing, that they won't, right?
Yeah.
I think there are differences between the two, and I'm not suggesting there aren't, right? For one thing, I would assume Kamala Harris will fire Merrick Garland or not retain him, right? Whereas Trump is likely to put like Eileen Cannon or Ken Paxton in as Attorney General. And as you said, people like you, the people you run with who are doing nonviolent protests, you're in the crosshairs, right? I'm not going to be a professor that much longer, or I'm sure that professors who say the kind of things I do would be in the crosshairs, right? In a physical harm kind of way, but just like we lose our jobs and things like that. There are real stakes here. And I'm not going to give anybody shit for being afraid of voting for Kamala Harris. I'm not going to do that. That's shitty. At the same time, I will criticize the Greens, who are basically, what gets me about the Greens is like many of them are bragging, we're going to defeat Harris. All right. If you do that, then you have to own it. In 2000, they should have said, yeah, we beat Gore, instead of running, oh no, we didn't. Like why, what's the point of doing something? It's a Quixote gesture. It's not going to succeed. You're going to get blamed. And nothing's going to change. But the biggest issue is how many Green Party people right now who are out organizing at a grassroots level or organizing over issues like they'll show up symbolically at labor organizing rallies and things like that. But how many of them are actually organizing 24/7?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Set you up for your last thoughts.
Yeah. I think that's what we want to close on today is organizing. And just going to talk. That's actually a big theme of this show is also like lifting up organizers, talking about direct action, things like that. Despite what people in the sort of liberal circles say, it's actually more important than ever. And we've seen a lot of action this year on student encampments around Gaza around climate protests against banks in New York City, around mutual aid and hurricane-stricken Appalachia. And organizing is a very important thing. All of those different instances of people rising up, that one, those weren't spontaneous. Those folks were very well organized. And then they were part of communities and groups that they decided to work on organizing. I personally helped organize an action at Lockheed Martin earlier this year with my big crew of friends here in the Bay Area. I think as we move into these potentially rockier times, it will probably be rockier domestically, particularly for those on the left if Trump gets reelected. But things aren't going to be that much better if Harris also gets elected. And what I would encourage people to do now is actually just really, if you're listening to the show, you probably already have left-leaning tendencies or maybe are an organizer, but continue to organize. If you're not part of a group, get involved with a group. And if Trump gets reelected, we're going to be doing a lot of work and we're going to be losing a lot of sleep and don't do it in an anxious way. Do it in a productive way. Do it in a way in which you can take action, whether it's participating in actions at banks, whether it's participating in a port shutdown or something like that. But that's the stuff that's going to be important going forward. And I'll be honest, we've been shutting down ports on the West Coast around Gaza for the last year. And it's whether it's Harris or Trump, we need more organizing, we need more direct action, and we need to really make them feel the heat of people on the street. I'll say one other thing is that the Harris campaign has done a lot to sort of just ice out the progressive left of her campaign. And that's everything from shouting down pro-Palestine protesters, not letting Palestinians speak at the DNC, buddying up with the Cheneys and Adam Kinzinger and people like that. And so it's really important that the progressive left or the radical left, whatever part you see yourself as, gets involved and does stuff. This is a lifelong effort, and we're going to have to do that because the world's in pretty dire straits.
Yeah. Harris and Biden last thought. And if any of you don't know it, you should check out the Brown University Costs of War Project. It's an amazing resource. But Biden and Harris have already this year spent $22+ billion on Israel, right? And this is where, we're still here where Flint is still trying to clean up its water. East Palestine hasn't been cleaned up after the train accident. You have all these growing problems that are very fentanyl and urban blight and things like that. Education,
climate disaster happening.
Climate disaster everywhere. Education, Trump will destroy public education. You see that. You destroy the Department of Education, which means the people who run the charter schools are licking their chops right now. They're going to get they're going to make bank, right? Yeah. Can we start the green and red charter school?
We should do that.
By the way, the thing I'll say is your governor, who is being hailed as a liberal hero, the 2028 front runner, essentially immediately started rousting homeless people, who his Supreme Court decision was made, getting rid of them. And he's just given nearly $1 billion to the film industry is in California. When you've given that $1 billion, whatever. That really threw me. The state's giving, I think it was $800 million more to the film industry to shoot California. So aren't they there already?
So I'm going to leave it at that. Folks, you've been listening to the Green and Red podcast. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're subscribing, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to this on an audio platform, give us a rate and review, or become a supporter at Green and Red Podcast tab, or by hitting that support button, or Patreon at patreon.com/Green Red Podcast. Misbehave like your life depends on it, or no matter who. Misbehave no matter who. Make trouble, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Just got out from the county prison doing 90 days for non-support. Tried to find me an executive position, but no matter how smooth I talk, he wouldn't listen to the fact that I was a genius. The man says we got all that we can